I will never forget the way my stomach dropped the moment those flashing red and blue lights lit up behind us. It was supposed to be a simple drive, nothing more than a ride to my doctor's appointment. Amanda, my daughter-in-law, was behind the wheel, her usual confident smile plastered across her face as though nothing in the world could touch her. But in an instant, that illusion shattered. The officer walked up to Amanda's side, professional and polite, and asked for her license. I watched Amanda's hands steady, almost too steady as she passed it over. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, clutching my purse, expecting nothing more than a routine ticket. Then, after a pause that felt far too long, the officer glanced past her, directly at me. His eyes softened for just a moment, and he leaned down with a folded piece of paper in his hand. He didn't raise his voice, but his words hit harder than a shout, "Ma'am. Don't go home with her. Find somewhere safe." My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. For a second, I wondered if I had misheard him. Maybe he was warning me about something else, some traffic hazard, some mistake. But no, his expression left no doubt. He was giving me a warning I didn't understand, and that was far more terrifying than any speeding ticket. He pressed the paper into my palm before stepping away, leaving me staring down at it with trembling hands. I could feel Amanda's eyes on me, sharp, searching, as if she could sense that something was happening beyond her control. I tried to steady my breathing, forcing myself not to look shaken, though inside I was unraveling. When I finally opened the paper, my entire world tilted. Staring back at me was Amanda's face, but not under the name I'd known for the past 2 years. Instead, beneath her photograph, printed in stark black letters, was a different name altogether, a stranger's name. In that instant, every uneasy feeling I had ever brushed aside came roaring back. The honey-sweet way she spoke, the way she pushed me to make decisions I didn't want to make, the anger that flashed in her eyes when she didn't get her way, suddenly it all fit together. This woman, the one who sat beside my son at family dinners, who smiled at neighbors in the grocery store, who claimed to love him, she wasn't Amanda at all. She was someone else entirely. And as I sat frozen in that passenger seat, holding that paper with shaking hands, one truth settled deep into my bones. I had been living under the same roof as a dangerous stranger. That Tuesday had started so ordinarily that I almost laughed later at how quickly life can twist on itself. The sun was streaming through my kitchen window, the kind of soft golden light that makes you feel safe, even when you don't realize you're about to step into danger. I remember standing at the sink, rinsing my coffee cup, when Amanda surprised me by offering to drive me to my eye appointment. That should have been my first clue. In the 2 years since she married my son, Amanda had never once gone out of her way for me unless there was something in it for her. She was the kind of woman who always managed to make generosity look like an investment, not kindness. But I was tired that morning. My eyesight had been blurry for weeks, and the idea of not having to navigate traffic on my own felt like a relief. So I let her take the driver's seat. As we drove through town, everything looked so normal. Kids on bikes, a couple walking their dog, the usual traffic lights on Main Street. But Amanda had a way of slipping her agenda into the most casual of moments. That day, it was about my house. She mentioned how large it was for a woman living alone, how hard it must be to keep up with maintenance, how senior living communities were more practical and safe. I remember my chest tightening, because that house wasn't just walls and furniture, it was the place where I raised my son, where my husband and I built a life, where he took his last breath in my arms not even 2 years before. The thought of selling it wasn't just impractical, It was unthinkable. Yet Amanda brought it up as if she were discussing the weather. It wasn't only the house. There had been the new truck that my son bought. Though anyone could see it was really Amanda's dream vehicle. The kitchen renovation that had cost more than I'd made in my last year of teaching. The anniversary cruise that she insisted on. Even though my son was working endless double shifts to pay for it all. Looking back, every one of those gifts had been red flags. At the time, though, I told myself she was just a woman with expensive taste. But something deeper unsettled me that day. I caught her glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. Her eyes sharp and calculating. Like she was studying me rather than caring about me. Her smile was warm, her voice sweet. But her eyes told a different story. By the time the flashing lights appeared behind us on the highway, my nerves were already frayed. She was speeding, as she always did when she grew impatient or irritated. The officer pulled us over, and while Amanda leaned on her practiced charm, I stayed quiet. When he looked at her license and then at me, I noticed his expression shift in a way I couldn't quite place. And then came the moment that would change everything, the folded piece of paper, pressed into my hand. The quiet warning not to go home with her. When I opened it, Amanda's face stared back at me. But underneath it was a different name. A name I didn't recognize. Rebecca Torres. That was the instant I realized I hadn't just been uneasy for no reason. I had been living under the roof of a stranger. The morning after that terrible drive, I sat at my kitchen table with the folded paper in front of me, its edges worn soft from the way I had held it all night. My hands shook as I waited for my son to arrive. I had rehearsed what I would say a dozen times. How I would explain that the woman he loved was not who she claimed to be. When Brian finally walked through the door, I saw the exhaustion on his face, the kind that comes from working long hours and carrying too much weight. I wanted to choose my words gently, but the urgency in my chest refused to let me. I told him everything, how the officer had pulled us over, how he warned me not to go home with Amanda, and how her license revealed another name entirely. I expected shock. I expected fear. What I didn't expect was the wall that went up between us almost instantly. His eyes narrowed, his jaw set, and suddenly I was no longer his mother. I was his accuser. He told me I must have misunderstood, that my eyesight had been blurry lately, that maybe I read the name wrong. He insisted Amanda was devoted to him, that she took care of their home, that she loved him in a way no one else ever had. I tried to reason with him. I reminded him of the truck, the endless spending, the way she avoided talking about her past. But the more I pushed, the more defensive he became. It was as if every red flag I pointed out only drove him closer to her. And then he said the words that nearly broke me. He wondered if I was jealous. Jealous of her. Jealous of the attention she gave him. Jealous of no longer being the most important woman in his life. I felt my chest tighten as though he had struck me. All the years of sacrifice. The nights I stayed up with him when he was sick. The hours spent making sure he had everything he needed, I was reduced in a moment to a bitter, lonely woman in his eyes. He couldn't see that I wasn't trying to tear his marriage apart. I was trying to save him. When he left, his face hard and unyielding, the kitchen felt unbearably empty. I sat there staring at the paper, Amanda's face smirking back at me under a false name, and I realized that no amount of pleading would open his eyes. He was blind to her, and maybe he wanted to be. The truth was clear and devastating all at once. I was on my own. If I wanted to protect him and myself, I would have to do it without his belief, without his help, and without the comfort of knowing he trusted me. When Brian walked out of my kitchen that day, leaving me alone with nothing but my own doubts, something inside me hardened. If he couldn't see the truth, then I would have to see it for both of us. I had spent my whole life as a teacher, piecing together clues from children's behavior, spotting lies in their excuses, learning to read between the lines. I decided to put those skills to work on Amanda. It started small. I began paying closer attention when I passed their house. One morning, I noticed her pulling a stack of envelopes from the mailbox. Most were addressed to Brian or to both of them. But one caught my eye. It was addressed to someone named Rebecca Chen. She looked over her shoulder before slipping it quickly into her purse. That was the moment my suspicions became something more. Not long after, I did something I never thought I'd do at 67 years old. I went through their trash. My heart pounded as I lifted bags out of the bin, half afraid a neighbor might see me. Most of it was the usual takeout containers, junk mail, household clutter. But buried near the bottom, I found a credit card statement with Amanda's photograph attached to the name. Jennifer Walsh. The charges weren't for groceries or gas. They were for expensive restaurants, high-end clothing, and hotel stays in Chicago on the very same days she claimed to be visiting specialists for her mysterious medical treatments. The deeper I dug, the darker the picture became. I found a deposit slip for $12,000 made out to Amanda under yet another name, linked to something called Midwest Investment Services. When I looked it up, I discovered it was a company that specialized in liquidating assets. Quickly, exactly the kind of service someone would use if they were trying to drain a man's life savings before vanishing. With each piece of evidence, my stomach turned colder. This wasn't just a greedy woman overspending her husband's paycheck. This was deliberate, structured fraud. She was moving money, juggling names, building an escape plan. I tried taking what I'd found to the police, hoping they'd step in. But without Brian willing to file a complaint, there was little they could do. Married couples share accounts, after all. On paper, it could all look like normal financial decisions. That left me no choice but to keep going on my own. I spent hours at the library, combing through online records, old news stories. Anything I could find about women who used aliases to con men out of money. What I found chilled me. Amanda or Rebecca or Jennifer or whatever her real name was fit the exact profile of women who belonged to organized fraud networks. These weren't lone scammers. They worked in teams, sharing information, teaching each other techniques, planting false trails. The more I read, the more I realized Amanda wasn't just a threat to my son. She was part of something far bigger, something that had hurt families across multiple states. And she wasn't finished. That realization hit me harder than any insult or denial from Brian. This wasn't just about protecting my son's marriage. This was about saving his life and mine from a woman who was never truly Amanda at all. It was late afternoon when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I glanced through the peephole, my stomach lurched. There she was, Amanda, standing on my porch with a casserole dish in her hands, smiling as though we were simply two women sharing a neighborly kindness. Every instinct in me screamed not to open that door. But she had already spotted the shadow of my movement. Pretending I wasn't home was no longer an option. Against my better judgment, I unlatched the chain and let her in. She moved through my kitchen like she owned it, setting the dish down on the counter and opening my refrigerator to tuck it away as if she had done it 100 times before. Her voice was syrupy sweet, almost apologetic. She said she thought there had been tension between us and wanted to clear the air. For a moment, I almost wanted to believe her. But her eyes betrayed her. They weren't soft. They weren't remorseful. They were calculating, watching, measuring. I tried to keep my composure, but my body was tight with dread. She spoke about family harmony, about Brian being caught in the middle, about how my suspicions were only making things worse. Her words were smooth, rehearsed, the way you calm down a child throwing a tantrum. But beneath the surface, I could feel the sharpness. Then, without warning, the mask slipped. Her voice dropped lower, steadier, and her smile twisted into something colder. She told me I had been digging too much, asking too many questions, calling too many people. She knew about the trash I had gone through, the calls I had made, even the notes I'd taken at the library. My skin went cold as she leaned closer. Her words no longer dressed as kindness. She said Brian's life depended on my cooperation. That accidents happened all the time at hardware stores, machines failed. Saw blades slipped, electrical cords sparked. She made it sound so casual, as though my son's life was nothing more than leverage in her scheme. I could hardly breathe. It wasn't just my safety she threatened. It was his. And then came the revelation that cut me deeper than all the others. She told me the detective I thought I had been confiding in, the one I believed, was finally on my side, wasn't real. It was her partner, feeding me just enough truth to keep me convinced while steering me away from real help. The relief I had felt, the belief that someone was listening, had all been a lie. In that moment, the walls of my own kitchen felt like they were closing in on me. I was cornered, outnumbered, and painfully aware that I was playing a game against people far more dangerous than I had realized. I stood there, every nerve in my body screaming with fear, staring at the woman who had woven herself so carefully into my family's life. The daughter-in-law who was never really Amanda at all. And as her words hung in the air like a threat sharpened to a blade, I knew with absolute certainty I was running out of time. For a moment, I thought I was trapped, that Amanda had won. Her threats about Brian's life echoed in my ears, each one sharper than the last. But what she didn't know was that while she had been studying me, I had been studying her, and unlike my son, I was not blind anymore. I looked at that casserole she had so confidently placed in my refrigerator, and I almost laughed, because what she thought was her symbol of control had already become mine. Before she ever stepped foot into my house that afternoon, I had prepared for this. I had sprinkled my own medication into the dish, carefully mixed so that it would only take a little while before her perfect composure began to crack. As she paced in my kitchen, laying out her threats, I kept my voice steady. I told myself not to show fear, not to reveal what I had done. At the same time, my phone sat just a few inches from me on the counter, recording every word, every admission, every cold plan she laid out. What she believed was her moment of dominance was, in truth, her full confession. Minutes passed, and I began to see it, the faint tremor in her hand. The way she leaned on the counter as though her body had grown heavier. Her words started to slow, her sharp confidence dulled by confusion. That was when I stepped forward. I told her she was right, that I had been digging, that I had seen through her. And while she had been weaving lies, I had been sending the truth to people who would finally act. I had already forwarded the recordings, the photographs of her false IDs, and the evidence I had gathered to the real police, the ones she claimed didn't exist. The moment her body wavered and her eyes widened in dawning realization, I knew the tables had finally turned. When the sirens grew louder outside, Amanda tried to straighten herself, tried to put her mask back on, but it was too late. Her legs buckled, and she slumped into one of my kitchen chairs, powerless for the first time since I had known her. The door burst open, and real officers filled the room. For the first time in weeks, I felt the crushing weight in my chest lift. They moved quickly, handcuffing the woman who had stolen so much from so many, the woman who had nearly destroyed my family. As they led her out, She shot me one last look, but it no longer carried power. It was hollow, desperate. She knew she had been beaten not by a system, not by luck, but by the woman she thought would be her easiest mark. I stood in my kitchen, trembling but triumphant, finally free from her shadow. For the first time in years, I felt vindicated. Amanda, or whoever she truly was finished. And I knew this battle was not just about saving my son. It was about reclaiming my own strength. 6 months later, I sat in a courtroom and watched the woman who had pretended to be Amanda finally face justice. She had gone by so many names: Rebecca, Jennifer, Lisa. But in the end, they were all masks, each one crumbling under the weight of evidence. When the judge handed down her sentence, 15 years in federal prison, I felt a quiet relief settle over me. It wasn't joy. It wasn't triumph. It was peace, the kind that comes from knowing the nightmare is finally over. Brian sat beside me, silent through most of the hearing. I could see the storm in his eyes: pain, shame, disbelief. When it was over and the marshals led her away, he finally turned to me. His voice trembled as he apologized. He admitted he had been blind, that love had made him believe what he wanted to believe, and that in doing so, he had almost lost everything. I squeezed his hand and told him he had nothing to be ashamed of. Manipulation isn't a sign of weakness, it's proof of how deeply we can trust, and how dangerous it is when that trust is betrayed. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. Amanda hadn't just tried to steal money or property. She had tried to steal my son's hope, his dignity, his belief in himself. And yet, here we were still standing, bruised. Yes, but stronger. I've come to realize that strength doesn't always look like what we imagine. Sometimes it isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet and steady. It's a mother who refuses to give up, even when her own child won't believe her. It's the courage to keep asking questions, even when the answers hurt. And it's the resilience to rebuild, no matter how shattered life feels. To anyone listening who has doubted themselves or felt powerless in the face of manipulation, let my story remind you you are stronger than you know. Age, grief, or fear do not define your limits. What defines you is the moment you decide to stand up. Even if you have to stand alone, thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, please share it, leave a comment, or subscribe. Your voice matters. And you never know, your story could be the one that helps someone else find their strength, too.